Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Grante, and today on the channel is another chapter in our audiobook series. We're in season 12 now, and the current book is The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. Today we are on law number 14, the law of expansion, and we're going to begin with a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, which is, "Man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimension." I hope that as you listen, your mind is stretched a little bit. Enjoy. Chapter 14, The Law of Expansion. Growth always increases your capacity. And it begins with a quote from a Nike commercial which says, "There is no finish line." Have you maxed out your capacity? Have you reached your full potential as a person? I believe that if you are reading this, the answer is probably no. If you're still breathing and are of sound mind, then you have the potential to keep increasing your capacity. In their book, If It Ain't Broke, Break It, authors Robert Kriegel and Lewis Patler write, quote, "We don't have a clue as to what people's limits are. All the tests, stopwatches, and finish lines in the world cannot measure human potential. When someone is pursuing their dream, they'll go far beyond what seems to be their limitations. The potential that exists within us is limitless and largely untapped. When you think about limits, you create them." End quote. How do you push towards your potential and keep increasing your capacity? I've written quite a bit about how to increase your effectiveness externally. You do that by including others and learning how to work with people. But the only way to increase your capacity internally is to change the way you approach personal growth. Learning more information is not enough. You must change how you think, and you must change your actions. How to increase your thinking capacity. I've heard that most experts believe people typically use only 10% of their true potential. That statement is staggering. If true, then the average person has a huge capacity for improvement. It's as if we possess hundreds of acres of possibilities but keep only half an acre under cultivation. So how do we tap into the unused 90%? The answer is found in changing how we think and what we do. Let's start by looking at how you need to think to increase your capacity. 1. Stop thinking more work and start thinking what works. Ask most people how they can increase their capacity, and they'll tell you by working more. There's a problem with that solution. More work will not necessarily increase your capacity. More of the same usually results in more of the same, when what we actually want is better than what we have. I fell into this trap early in my career. In fact, when people began asking me to help them be more successful, my answer to them was to work harder. I assumed that their work ethic wasn't as good as mine, and if they would simply do more, then they would be successful. However, I realized the error in my thinking when I started traveling to underdeveloped countries where many people worked very hard but saw very little return for all their efforts. I learned that hard work is not always the answer. That prompted me to start looking at the way I approached my working life. Being a high-energy person, I worked hard and kept up for long hours. But I knew that I wasn't as effective as I could be. I realized that the problem that I valued effort over effectiveness. I was doing lots of things instead of the right things. My to-do list kept getting longer, but my impact was not increasing. I realized that I had to start changing my thinking. I looked at everything I was doing and started to ask, what works? That's what I recommend you do. Figure out what works. To do that, ask yourself the following 3 questions. What am I required to do? What gives the greatest return, and which gives me the greatest reward? These questions will help you to focus your attention on what you must do, what you ought to do, and what you really want to do. Number 2, stop thinking, can I, and start thinking, how can I? At first glance, the questions can I and how can I may appear to be very similar. However, the reality is that they are worlds apart in terms of results. Can I is a question filled with hesitation and doubt. It is a question that imposes limitations. If that is the question you regularly ask yourself, you are undermining your efforts before you even begin. How many people could have accomplished much in life but failed to try because they doubted and answered no to the question, can I? When you ask yourself, how can I, you give yourself a fighting chance to achieve something. The most common reason people don't overcome the odds is that they don't challenge the odds enough. They don't test their limits. They don't push their capacity. How can I assumes that there is a way and you just need to find it. As a young leader, I was challenged by the words of Robert Schuller, who said, quote, "What would you attempt if you knew that you couldn't fail?" End quote. To me, the answer was obvious, a lot more than I was currently attempting. Schuller's question prompted me to think outside the box. It made me want to take more risks, to push more boundaries, to test my own limits. It made me realize that most of our limitations are based not on lack of ability, but lack of belief. Sharon Wood, the first North American woman to climb Mount Everest, said of her experience, quote, "I discovered it wasn't a matter of physical strength, but a matter of psychological strength. The conquest lay within my own mind to penetrate those barriers of self-imposed limitations and get to the good stuff, the stuff called potential, the 90% of which we barely use." End quote. If you want to tap into that unused 90%, ask, how can I? Do that, and greater achievement becomes a matter of when and how, not if. Recently, a friend gave me a book by Price Pritchett entitled You. In it, Pritchett writes, quote, "Your skepticism, which you presume is based on rational thinking and an objective assessment of factual data about yourself, is rooted in mental junk. Your doubts are not the product of accurate thinking, but habitual thinking. Years ago, you accepted flawed conclusions as correct, began to live your life as if those warped ideas about your potential were true, and ceased the bold experiment in living what brought you many breakthrough behaviors as a child. Now it's time for you to find that faith you had in yourself before." End quote. If you have spent time in a negative environment, or you have experienced abuse in your life, you may find this thinking transition to be very difficult. If that describes you, then let me take a moment to encourage you and explain something. I'm asking you to shift from can I to how can I, when maybe you need to change your thinking from I can't to how can I. I believe that if you've gotten this far in this book, then deep down, you already believe that you can achieve things. I believe you can too. I believe God has put in every person the potential to grow, expand, and achieve. The first step in doing that is believing that you can, and I believe in you. The second step is perseverance. As you get started, it may not look like you're making progress, but that doesn't matter. Don't give up. Pritchett says that everything looks like a failure in the middle. He writes, quote, "You can't bake a cake without getting the kitchen messy. Halfway through surgery, it looks like there's been a murder in the operating room. If you send a rocket to the moon, about 90% of the time it's off course. It fails its way to the moon by continually making mistakes and correcting them." End quote. You can change your thinking. You can believe in your potential. You can use failure as a resource to help you find the edge of your capacities. As psychiatrist Fritz Perls observed, learning is discovering that something is possible. The law of expansion is about learning, growing, increasing our capacity. It's said that one day the great artist Michelangelo went into the studio of Raphael. He looked at one of his early drawings, considered it a moment, then took a piece of chalk and wrote the word amplius, which means greater or larger, across the entire drawing. Michelangelo was encouraging Raphael to think bigger, and that is what we need to do. Number 3, stop opening one door and start thinking many doors. When it comes to growth, you don't want to stake your future on one door. It may not open. It's much better to consider many possibilities and look for multiple answers to all of your questions. Think in terms of options. I made the mistake of looking for the one door early in my career. I wanted to build a great church, so I went looking for the key that would lead me to success. I started interviewing people to find someone who could give me the secret. It was almost like I was looking for someone who could grant my wish, but my thinking was all wrong. I wanted someone to give me a formula for my dream so I could act on it. In time, I came to realize that I needed to act on my dream and formulate the details as I made the journey. Mobility was critical to progress, and my strategy began to evolve out of my discovery progress. One of my favorite words is options. Anyone who knows me well understands that I don't like being fenced in. But my desire for options is driven by more than just the desire to avoid mental claustrophobia. It's driven by the desire to increase my capacity. The more time goes by, the more I want to explore creative options, and the less I want to rely on someone else's system. As I have learned to think many doors and explore options, here is what I have learned. There is more than one way to do something successfully. The odds of arriving anywhere increase with creativity and adaptability. Movement with intentionality creates possibilities. Failures and setbacks can be great tools for learning. Knowing the future is difficult. Controlling the future, impossible. Knowing today is essential. Controlling today is possible. Success is a result of continued action filled with continual adjustments. The greatest challenge you will ever face is that of expanding your mind. It's like crossing the great frontier. You must be willing to be a pioneer, to enter uncharted territory, to face the unknown, to conquer your own doubts and fears. But here's the good news. If you can change your way of thinking, you can change your life. As Oliver Wendell Holmes remarked, quote, "Man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions." End quote. If you want to expand your capacity, the first place to start is always within your own mind. How to increase your capacity for action. If you want to expand your potential and therefore your capacity, you must first change your thinking. However, if you change only your thinking and neglect to change your action, you will fall far short of your potential. To start expanding your capacity, take the following 3 steps. 1. Stop doing only those things you have done before and start doing those things you could and should do. The first step toward success is becoming good at what you know how to do. But the more that you do what you know, the more you discover additional worthy things that you could do. When this occurs, you have a decision to make. Will you continue doing what you have always done, or will you make the leap and try new things? Doing new things leads to innovation and new discoveries, and among those discoveries is the realization of things you should do on a consistent basis. If you do those, you will continue to grow and expand your potential. If you do not, you will plateau. My friend Kevin Hall describes this process of discovery and growth in Aspire when he writes about a discussion he had with one of his mentors, retired Professor Arthur Watkins. The gentleman was describing the growth of a tradesman from apprentice to master. Kevin recalls their conversation, quote, "A master didn't become a master overnight," he explained. "There was a process. First, one must become an apprentice, then a journeyman, and finally a master." Apprentice, journeyman, master. These 3 words illustrate the importance of going through fundamental and necessary steps to acquire the kind of humility which is commensurate with true leadership. Arthur grew quite animated as if he were about to reveal an ancient truth. "Did you know that apprentice means learner?" he asked, and then taught me that the word comes from the French apprendre, which means to learn. In earlier times, apprentice was the name for someone who would select a trade, then find a master in his village to teach him the skills necessary for the chosen vocation. After learning all he could from the local master, the apprentice would then travel elsewhere to broaden the education. Launching forward on such a journey turned an apprentice into a journeyman. A journeyman would often travel long distances for the privilege of working under the master who could best help him further hone his craft. Over time, a journeyman could eventually become a master himself and be in a position to start the cycle all over again. End quote. The process of expanding one's potential is ongoing. It ebbs and flows. Opportunities come and go. The standards we must set for ourselves are constantly changing. What we could do changes as we develop. What we should do also evolves. We must leave behind some old things to take on new ones. It can be difficult work, but if we are willing, our lives are changed. In 1974, I became convinced that everything rises and falls on leadership. With that conviction, came a passion for leading. I was fired up to learn how to lead effectively and then touch others. After several years, I achieved a level of comfort in my ability to lead others and teach on the subject. I was enjoying what I did and seeing a degree of success. But then I began to see opportunities, other things I could do. I had the chance to reach a larger audience. I was at a decision point. Should I enjoy my life or attempt to expand it? Expansion would mean leaving my comfort zone. I would have to start a business to produce teaching materials. I would have to develop people who would work alongside me. I would have to learn to write books so I could reach people I'd never get to speak to. I would need to travel and learn the customs and cultures of those who lived in other countries to be able to communicate outside of the US. All these changes took time, and I made a lot of mistakes. Often I was in over my head. Most days I felt like Pablo Picasso when he said, "I am always doing that which I cannot do in order to learn how to do it." The process of adaptation and expansion has continued for me and still does. More recently, I've had to learn how to use social media to expand my reach. I've started 2 companies. I've learned how to start a coaching initiative, and I'm continuing to learn how to connect with people in other countries around the globe. I never want to stop learning. I want to keep enlarging myself, expanding potential, and improving my craft to my dying day. I want to live out the words of author and pastor Norman Vincent Peale, who said, "Ask the God who made you to keep remaking you." Number 2, stop doing what is expected and start doing more than is expected. We live in a culture that awards trophies to people for simply showing up, regardless of their contribution. Because of that, many people think that they are doing well if they just do what is expected of them. I don't believe that that helps people reach their potential or expand their capacity. To do that, a person has to do more. Former General Electric CEO Jack Welch calls this getting out of your pile. To distinguish yourself, get noticed, and advance your career, you need to do more and be more. You have to rise above average. You can do this by asking more of yourself than others ask, expecting more from yourself than others expect, believing more in yourself than others believe, doing more than others think you should have to do, giving more to others than others think you should give, and helping more than others think that you should help. I like the way boxer Jack Johnson described it as, quote, "going far beyond that call of duty, doing more than others expect. This is what excellence is all about." And it comes from striving, maintaining the highest standards, looking after the smallest detail, and going the extra mile. Excellence means doing your very best in everything, in every way, end quote. Doing more than is expected does more than just separate you from your colleagues by earning you a reputation for performance. It also trains you to develop a habit for excellence, and that compounds over time. Continued excellence expands your capabilities and your potential. Number 3, stop doing important things occasionally and start doing important things daily. Have you ever heard the expression, "Life is a great big canvas and you should throw all the paint on it that you can"? I like the intent and exuberance of those words, but I don't think that advice is very good, unless you want a mess. A better thought is to make your life a masterpiece, which requires much thought, a clear idea, and selection when it comes to what paint you put on the canvas. How do you do that? By doing the important things every day. Writer and philosopher Henry David Thoreau wrote, quote, "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him, and he will live with the license of a higher order of beings," end quote. I believe advancing confidently in the directions of one's dreams means doing what is important every day. To do what's not important every day does nothing to you. It merely uses up your time. To do the right thing only occasionally does not lead to consistent growth and the expansion of your life. Both components are necessary. Daily growth leads to personal expansion. Poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow compared his growth to that of an apple tree. He said, quote, "The purpose of that apple tree is to grow a little new wood each year, and that is what I plan to do," end quote. He also expressed a similar thought in one of his poems when he wrote, "Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end always, but to live that each tomorrow finds us further than today." If we do what's important every day, that can be true for us. Expanding his capacity and expanding his impact. One of the greatest rewards I receive from writing and speaking is occasionally hearing from someone who has been positively impacted by my work. Recently, I received a letter from Tim Williams, a sergeant who works for the county sheriff's office in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He wrote to tell me about the intentional growth path he has been taking and how it has expanded his capacity. Tim wrote, quote, "As a part of my promotional testing process in 2005, I was required to read the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. I had told myself that I would first read each of the books I was assigned, then reread each, and finally skim each with a highlighter to obtain possible test questions. My first read of the 21 Laws did not leave me with a favorable opinion. My reread left me feeling better and agreeing with most. As I skimmed later, I came to the conclusion that I had been under a leadership rock for the better part of my life. Prior to being a sergeant with the sheriff's office, I had spent 20 years as a sergeant in the U.S. Army Special Forces, so I didn't consider leadership a new concept." End quote. Tim went on to say that he continues to read books as part of his growth plan. They have changed his thinking and his actions. As a result, he has continued to advance within the organization, saying, quote, "As I was promoted in rank, I have also been able to institute several changes within my organization that I credit directly to what I have learned. I have been able to influence others and help many." End quote. Tim has adopted two practices as a result of what he's learned. The first is that he goes to where his employees are. Tim said, quote, "I spent my nights in the jail going from station to station, visiting with deputies and just talking about anything. I listened, laughed, and just spent time hearing about their families and, on some occasions, their complaints." End quote. As a result, he started connecting with people. The second thing was writing personal notes to people to let them know that he cares about them and appreciates their work. He also became very intentional about noting in their evaluations the positive things his employees did, not just their deficiencies. He says that the increase in morale was amazing. Tim went on to say, "At year's end, I decided to take this one step further and send an email to all those assigned to my shift. I wanted it to be positive and transparent to all. I have made this an annual event and the results have been fantastic. My shift sick time usage dropped markedly. I've enclosed the first edition of what I call, 'Thanks, I Noticed.'" Quote, "Shift 4. As we come to the end of the year, I wanted to take a moment and reflect on the things that all of you have done individually to make my life easier as a supervisor. Because of the competitive nature of this profession we share, I want all of you to collectively know what you have done for each other. As this year has passed, in some way each of you has contributed to the success that we all share. So for all these things that you may have thought went unnoticed, please let me say thank you. I did notice." End quote. As a deputy sergeant and a retired Special Forces non-commissioned officer, Tim Williams would have said, "I've been a leader for more than 20 years. I know what it is to lead, even when people's lives are on the line. I'm done learning. I will rely on my experience and finish my career, and people better just do what I say." He could have said that, but he didn't. Instead, he was open to growth. He decided to continue to be a learner, and for that reason, his life, his influence, and his potential continue to expand. He lives the law of expansion. Growth always increases your capacity. That quality is present in all lifelong learners, and for that reason, their capacity keeps on expanding. It's said that when Pablo Casals was 95 years old, a young reporter asked, "Mr. Casals, you are 95 and the greatest cellist that ever lived. Why do you still practice for 6 hours a day?" Mr. Casals' answer was telling. He said, "Because I think that I'm making progress." You have the potential to keep making progress until the day you die, if you have the right attitude about growth. You need to believe what Rabbi Samuel M. Silver said, or he did. He said, quote, "The greatest of all miracles is that we need not be tomorrow what we are today, but we can improve if we make use of the potential implanted in us by God." End quote. Applying the law of expansion to your life. Number 1. Have you made the mental transition from "I can't" or "can I" to "how can I"? Test yourself, do some dreaming, then ask yourself, if I knew I could not fail, what would I attempt? If I had no limitations, what would I like to do? If finances were not an issue, what would I be doing in my life? Take some time and write your answers to those questions. Now look at the answers. What is your gut level response to them? Do you look at them and think, "That's far-fetched. This is impossible. How outlandish." Or do you look at them and think, "How can I do that? What must I do to make this happen? What will I have to trade to make this transition?" If it's the latter, you are mentally ready to expand your capacity. If it's the former, you still have work to do. Spend some time figuring out what's stopping you from believing that you can make the changes necessary. Step number 2. Give yourself an effectiveness audit so you can be sure you are thinking what works instead of more work. Go back through your calendar and to-do lists from the past 4 weeks. By the way, if you aren't using some kind of system to plan your days, that's a step you need to take. Try to quantify the amount of time you spent on every action and activity during those 4 weeks. Think about how much time you believe each activity should have taken and give yourself an efficiency rating from A+ to F. Now sort all the activities into categories. Where do you see patterns? What is working and what isn't working? What are you doing too much of, either because you're not being efficient enough or because the activity is off purpose? What changes do you need to make? Use the criteria of required, return, or reward to help you make judgments on what needs to change. Number 3, do you have a plan and system to make sure you are doing what's important daily? First, define what is essential to you on a daily basis. In my book, Today Matters, I wrote about my daily dozen. I include the list here for you as an idea starter. Choose and display the right attitudes. Determine and act on important priorities. Know and follow healthy guidelines. Communicate with and care for the family. Practice and develop good thinking. Make and keep proper commitments. Earn and properly manage finances. Deepen and live out my faith. Initiate and invest in solid relationships. Plan for and model generosity. Embrace and practice good values. Seek and experience improvements. Once you've created your own list, figure out how you will manage to follow through on each of those priorities every day so you stay on track and continue to expand your potential.